The Attorney General has come up with a new twist in the ongoing effort to take away the guns Americans use for self-defense, hunting, and recreational purposes. I'll be right back. Edward Levy, the new Attorney General of the United States, proposes that strict federal controls be placed on handguns in urban areas with high or rising crime rates. In those areas, he'd make it illegal to sell, transfer, or bring in handguns or ammunition. His theory presumably is that people bent on murder, robbery, and other violent crimes would suddenly be deterred because it would be illegal for them to carry or use guns. Now that's funny. It seems to me that the best way to deter murderers and thieves is to arm law-abiding folk, not disarm them. Before we disarm the average American, we should ask ourselves, what is it that deters a criminal? I think there are three answers: fear of punishment, fear of getting caught, and fear of being hurt or wounded during the commission of the crime. You can't punish the criminal unless you catch him, so his first real fears are of capture and of being hurt. These come at the hands of either the police or the intended victims. When you come right down to it, there aren't many police out there in comparison to the number of potential victims. As a result, many criminals go uncaught, and easy bail, easy judges, and soft laws quickly put back on the street too many of those who are caught. This leaves the intended victim pretty much in the position of having to fend for himself, though the average victim doesn't actually fend very well. He or she is usually a peaceful person who isn't well versed in any art of self-defense, whether it be with gun, fist, or karate chop. Nevertheless, as news story after story shows, if the victim is armed, he has a chance. A better chance by far than if he isn't armed. Nobody knows, in fact, how many crimes are not committed because criminals know that a certain store owner has a gun and will use it. And nobody knows how many crimes are committed only because a store or home looks like an easy touch. It seems to me that Mr. Levy has things backward. Rather than take away guns of the law-abiding in areas where criminals and crimes are rampant, he should encourage homeowners and business people to purchase them and learn how to use them properly. If Mr. Levy succeeds in outlawing guns in high crime areas, he'll only have made sure that the law-abiding citizens in those areas are sitting ducks for any gun-wielding criminal who comes along. Americans should always be alert to proposals that would lessen their ability to defend themselves, their homes, their families, and their businesses. And this includes the proposals to take away their firearms. After all, guns don't make criminals. It's criminals who make use of guns. They're the ones who should be punished, not the law-abiding citizen who seeks only to protect himself. I'm going to be talking about this for the next couple of days. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. What's a better way to control crime? Take guns away from law-abiding citizens or impose mandatory sentences on criminals who use guns? I'll be right back. Yesterday, I talked about the odd proposal by President Ford's new Attorney General, Edward Levy, to put strict federal controls on the use of guns in urban areas which have high or rising crime rates. Mr. Levy's proposal would limit even more the already limited protection law-abiding citizens have in those parts of the country where they need it most. I believe the proposal would also be a clear and unconstitutional infringement on the rights of the states to govern their own internal affairs. Mr. Levy, in his eagerness, seems to have overlooked this. Let's hope he has second thoughts. Let us hope also that he gives serious thought to how we can control crime, violent crimes, without infringing on the hereditary and constitutional rights of a free people. There are two ways to do this. Steps can be taken at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, that are aimed at the lawbreaker, not the law-abider. They aren't new steps. They involve swift and sure punishment for those who are convicted of using deadly weapons, guns, knives, clubs, and so forth, in the commission of crimes. In 17th century England, highwaymen using loaded guns were executed. Nobody suggests that we go that far today. But I believe it's imperative that every government, state and the federal, set mandatory prison sentences for persons using guns in the commission of crimes. Any person using a gun for criminal purposes should have the most stringent conditions attached to any possible parole, too. I believe that criminals using guns should be barred from ever owning or using guns again. It should be made very difficult for such persons to incur any new debts to society. Many judges, many government officials, and many citizens need to revise their thinking about the reason for laws and about the need for prisons. It seems to me the main purpose for prisons is to protect the law-abiding members of society from those who would prey upon them. A secondary purpose is to punish criminals with the idea that punishment is a deterrent to future crime. A third reason is to rehabilitate, but the fact is that rehabilitation is largely a myth. Some persons can be trained so they can earn honest livings. Perhaps a few will even come to know the error of their ways. But let's not kid ourselves about the overall effectiveness of rehabilitation. And let's not lose sight of the main purpose for putting people in prison, the right of society to protect itself from those who would disobey its laws. It's likely there would be less crime in America if more tough judges were appointed, if sure and swift justice were meted out, and if more violent criminals were jailed. I, for one, would be grateful if the Attorney General would concentrate more on getting criminals behind bars and worry less about ways to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. We're only 9 years away from 1984, and now there's a federal proposal to disarm law-abiding citizens in many parts of the country. I'll be right back. I've been talking recently about the ongoing efforts by well-meaning people to limit or even abolish the right of American citizens to own guns. These people like to point out that most murders are perpetrated with guns, and that most crimes of violence involve the use of handguns, and that many persons are accidentally shot each year. Therefore, they say, outlaw guns and there will be less crime, fewer killings, and fewer accidental deaths. I disagree. Even if all they say is true, and I doubt that it is, I disagree. Now, let me tell you why. Yes, I believe a person has a right to own a means of protecting himself against criminals, but that's not my main reason for disagreeing. And yes, I believe that criminals would get guns anyway, thus leaving the average citizen even more at their mercy than he is today. But that, too, isn't my main reason for disagreeing. Let's go back for a minute to the Constitution. We all know that it clearly specifies that you and I have the right to bear arms, and that that right cannot be infringed. An entire amendment deals with this right. The amendment is simple. It reads that, quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, unquote. Underline, if you will, the word free when you read the Second Amendment. The Founding Fathers obviously were concerned about preserving freedom. They believed that arms in the hands of the people would secure freedom. They felt that a militia should be trained for just that purpose. Now, we've neglected to keep a well-trained militia, but that fact alone is not reason to also give up the right to bear arms. Interestingly, the Founding Fathers don't specify that the state is necessarily endangered from the outside, although that probably remained one of their concerns. But if one looks at the times during which the amendment was written, and at the context of the other 9 of those first 10 amendments, it becomes apparent that what they really feared was the possibility that government might take away the freedoms of the citizens in their newly created free state. Each of those first 10 amendments guarantees a freedom. The Second Amendment guarantees the right of the citizen to protect those other freedoms. Take away the arms of the citizen, and where is his defense against not only criminals, but also against the possible despotism of his government? In police states, they take away the citizen's arms first. This ensures the perpetuation of the state's power and the ability of the police to deal with dissenters as well as criminals. I believe that those who run our federal, state, and local governments today, as well as those who advocate disarming the people, have no sinister motives. But history tells us this won't always be the case. So isn't it better for the people to own arms than for them to risk enslavement by evil or power-hungry men or nations? The Founding Fathers thought so. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening.